Welcome to the Sports Sesh podcast. I'm your host, Mason Shatwell, and my co-host is James Evans. And today we've got MMA Junkies John Morgan on. Cheers for joining us, John.
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me, guys.
Obviously, just before then, you were talking about being on furlough. What's the last couple of months been like for you personally?
Yeah, man, it's been tough. I mean, obviously, it's been an interesting time professionally, right? Because we've been covering the return of MMA. Before any other sports, right? So I felt like that was a real honor to kind of be on the leading edge of seeing like how sports and how society in whole was going to deal with this whole COVID-19 thing. So from a professional standpoint, that part of it was cool. The bad part about it is our parent company Gannett has had to furlough, basically 1 week a month, our entire company. We're talking about tens of thousands of people. So completely understandable, of course. This thing impacted everybody, and the financial impact was huge. And I'm just glad that we all got to keep our jobs. But it's been tough, man. For 6 months, 1 week a month, I haven't been able to work. You know what I mean? And I'm 42 years old, man, and I that hasn't happened to me since I was 16. You know what I mean? So it was a weird reality to get used to, but man, it's all weird reality for us, right? My kid's downstairs right now doing, virtual learning for his third grade class. Just who would have ever seen all this stuff coming,
For some of the viewers, could you explain to them what you do when you're not on furlough?
So I'm the lead staff reporter for MMA Junkie. We're owned by USA Today, which is a major newspaper here in the United States. They purchased us back in 2011. So we provide kind of, mainstream coverage for the newspaper side. And then, of course, MMA Junkie is really covering, the hardcore side of it. And honestly, man, I do a little bit of everything. It's funny, man. I started out as a writer. I loved writing, and that's all I really wanted to do. But as you guys well know, man, you can't be a specialist anymore in this game. Now you're a writer, a photographer, a videographer, a podcaster, a video editor, all that stuff. So kind of a little jack of all trades for everything at MMA Junkie. I've got my hand in a little bit of everything with it that we do.
How did you get into the media industry?
It's funny, man. I grew up loving sports, and at some point you realize you're probably not going to be good enough to play professional sports, but I love being involved with it, and I loved writing. I love telling stories, man. And I thought that media would be a good way to do it. I'd still keep me involved in sports. At the time, when I was a kid, it certainly wasn't mixed martial arts, because back then, while I was an MMA fan from the very beginning, man, you never really saw it as an industry. Back then it was just like this spectacle, Wild West stuff, But I played a little bit of everything growing up. Soccer is actually my second favorite sport. But I played, baseball, basketball, all that stuff. And so I thought if I could just write about something, it'd be cool. And then interestingly enough, after I got done with school, I put myself through school in the restaurant business. And I stayed in the restaurant business for years because I was making way more money than I could as a journalist. But then one day I just came to a point where I was like, man, this is not what I wanted to do. Like, I'm okay. I'm good at it. I'm making good money, but I don't want to live the rest of my life not chasing that dream of doing that one thing that I wanted to do. So I said, you know what? I'll give it a shot, man. I'm going to walk out of this industry and try my hand at going back to being a sports writer. And that was for MMA Junkie, and that was 14 years ago, man. And here we are still today. So it's been quite the run.
With these being such unprecedented times, obviously you touched upon earlier, what's it like going to these live press conferences now?
Yeah, it's interesting, man. The press conference that we get are nice. Like over in Fight Island, we actually got to do pre-fight stuff, but now at least we get to do post-fight and see the athletes. The virtual media days that we do, like I'm thankful that we get an opportunity to do them. Like I appreciate the UFC doing them, because obviously it gives us the content that we need. But it's not the same. It's not, especially pre-fight, like seeing somebody and looking at them physically and evaluating, how they look, how their demeanor is, what do they say, all those nonverbal cues that you get to pick up on. I miss those. But yeah, as far as seeing everybody in person, man, the UFC is doing it right, man. From Florida to Abu Dhabi to here in Vegas. Man, the way they set everything up now, we've all got our tables, our stations are all socially distanced. Everybody's got their own microphones so that you don't have to pass microphones around. Everybody's required to wear a mask the whole time that you're on property. We've all been COVID tested, which is amazing. I think at this point I've been tested like 27 times or something like that. So, which is great, because like for my family's never had a COVID test, but like, I'm pretty sure if you're good, we're good, So
Yeah.
It's interesting, man. It's interesting, but it definitely feels safe, man. The steps that the UFC has gone to, it doesn't feel like dangerous or like we're being careless or risky or anything like that.
Well, something I wanted to ask is, I know when the press conferences are at the usual self, I noticed that you always have the first question. What's the story behind that? How you get the first question in?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story because it never really started as anything. It's just, I was always at UFC press conferences. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I usually did, not mind kicking them off and having the first question. And then finally it got to a point where basically like there would be these press conferences, and UFC President Dana White would come up there and he'd be like, "Does anybody have any questions?" And everybody would raise their hand, and then it takes a second to get the microphone passed. They're moving a microphone, and there were a couple times where Dana was like, "What? Nobody has any questions? Nobody?" And we're all like, "No, we have questions. Just hang on. I'm trying to get a mic." So finally, it was Dave Schaller back in the day, who now works for the Philadelphia 76ers of the NBA. But he was like, "Dude, do you mind just like starting with the microphone in your hand so we don't have that like kind of uncomfortable silence or whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's no problem. I'll do that." So it really just started out as something silly, and then everybody just kind of got used to me asking the first question. So now it's just like I think it's just tradition at this point, basically.
Do you think the UFC, obviously you touched upon it earlier, given it such praise, do you think the UFC has been smoothly run and has taken the right precautions in coming back since the global pandemic?
I do, man. I really do, to be honest with you, man. I was in Jacksonville when they came back, and they were kind of on that leading edge, and there was some controversy, some people saying, hey, should they do this, should they not? But my kind of point of view on it from the beginning was, I don't really understand what waiting till a certain date is going to do. Like, it was very clear to me early on that COVID ain't going away until we got it, until we got a vaccine for it. So unless we're all agreeing that we're going to just not do anything until there's a vaccine, you got to figure out a way to operate in these times. And man, I was a little nervous for the first one. I'd been holed up in my house like everybody else, kind of hanging on, and I was really worried about the flight. We're all going to be crowded on a plane and stuff. But obviously, air travel's been down quite a bit, so it wasn't that bad. And then once we got there, I mean, just seeing the steps that they had taken, the way that everybody was being socially distanced, the requirement of masks, the availability of sanitizer, the not being allowed to congregate in groups. I mean, all these like rules and regulations I said, man, I think they're doing it right here. And it's really just gotten more and more each step along the way. I mean, Fight Island over Abu Dhabi, man, that was a whole another level, man. I've joked about it, but it's crazy. Like when we got off the plane, they took us to the hotels, and there's like staff in hazmat suits, and they're spraying all of our stuff down with sanitizer. And man, I mean, that was just like one thing. I mean, they went to another. So yeah, I really do feel like the UFC is being cautious about this, doing the right thing. Like I said, you're COVID tested to go to the weigh-ins. You're COVID tested if you want to be in the building during fight night. The athletes, like, there's 2 hotels here in Las Vegas that the UFC is just taking over basically. And they've made a compound, and like you're not even allowed, like the doors are locked and you can't get in unless, you've got a mask and you've got the proper wristbands. One of the hotels, the parking lots are all blocked off. The other one they can't because there's a restaurant in the parking lot too, so they can't do that. But the residents in, like, there's guards at the entrances to the parking lot, so you can't even come in unless you've got the proper wristband. So I mean, listen, they really are taking steps, and then of course, man, what a blessing the Apex has been for them, right? I mean, to have that thing built right in time for this, I mean, I don't want to say you get lucky, but man, it feels like they got lucky a little bit, man. It made their life a lot easier.
Talk us through your overall experience in Yas Island, and if you could give it a grade, what would you give it?
Yeah, I'd have to give it an A, man. The Abu Dhabi Tourism Committee, man, they know what they're doing, man, and they did it for a reason. They want to promote Abu Dhabi, of course, as like this, as a destination. I mean, they were doing it for touristic reasons, no question about it. But their commitment to safety was on another level. And yeah, it was a wild experience, man. You go over there and the first thing you got to do is first of all, you got to get tested before you can even get on the plane. Then you get on the plane, you go over there, and you've got to get tested as soon as you land, and then you got to quarantine for 48 hours. And it's like, don't even leave your room. They bring food to you. They don't want you out at all. Do that 48 hours, test you again, and then obviously along the way, test it all the way as well. So, I mean, just the experience was top notch, man. The facility was great. We were a little worried about the temperature because, when we went over there, what was it, 242, I believe, was Habib and Poirier. That one was rough because it was kind of a temporary building. It's calling it a tent would be wrong because it's bigger and more sound structure than that, but it was temporary. And it was super, super hot. So we were really worried about that. Like, man, are these athletes just going to be burning up like they were at 242? But no, the venue that they're using now, really nice, and that's not a concern. The middle of the night stuff's a little tough. Getting your body used to, because everything's still done on kind of that North American time. I probably shouldn't complain to you guys because you're used to being up in the middle. I'm not used to being up in the middle of the night to watch fights, so it's a little tough to get used to.
Well, when you was over in Yas Island and obviously you had to do the quarantine period, how was that, having to quarantine for 48 hours before being able to do anything?
It was interesting, right? Because you're there and you kind of want to get out and about, and you want to get to work. Fortunately, it's kind of funny. I bought a VR headset for my son, actually, because I thought it would be kind of cool since we're all stuck quarantining in our houses. And I actually brought it with me. I was like, I know I bought this for you, but I'm going to take this with me. So I was, it's kind of cool to put on a VR headset and kind of take your mind out of that space that you were in. And we had a balcony that we could walk out onto and get some fresh air and that sort of thing. But I tell you what was funny is it was supposed to be a 48-hour quarantine. And that 48-hour quarantine was supposed to end at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, not that there's a lot to do at 2 o'clock in the morning, but I was like, dude, I'm walking out of this house, like this apartment, like the second that we get it. Well, they didn't give us our wristbands to get out until like 8 hours later. So the 48 hours really wasn't that big of a deal. But that 8 hours afterwards where you think you're supposed to be free and you're still stuck in there, oh, man, I was going crazy, man. I was texting everybody I knew that was either in Abu Dhabi or in Vegas, like trying to get ourselves free, man. It was such a weird psychological thing. Like the 48 hours you can deal with that. But then the 8 that got added unexpectedly on top, it was like a torture to your mind of like, just get me out of here,
Obviously, you've spent just under 2 weeks over in Abu Dhabi. What would you say was the biggest or the best fight you've witnessed on Fight Island?
Oh, man, that's a good one. I liked Till and Whitaker. That was a great fight, man. I really enjoyed that one. Hamzat Chimaev, just the emergence of him, that was a great story to watch. Tanner Boser, what a personality that dude is, like opening up the monster can with his teeth at the press conference. I mean, it was crazy. There were some great fights. The first week was the first week was interesting because we were kind of seeing all the the protocols in place and what the procedures were. The second week was nuts because remember that was that midweek fight with Cater and Ige, which was a great fight there as well. So you had Wednesday and Saturday, so it was a super busy week. And then that third week, it was funny because the third week was the first week you actually had some days off in the middle of the week. And at that point, because it ended up being like 23 days total. And by that last week when you had a day off to slow down a little bit, it was like, oh man, I'm so ready to get back home. So we'll see what this next one's going to be like because it looks like we're going back by everything I can tell. For the next pay-per-view, and I think the full run is going to be like 5 weeks over there, 6 weeks over there. So we'll see how the mind holds up over that.
Is it certainly a lot different? Obviously, not having the fans, because obviously when you go to press conferences live, you got some hecklers at the back of your mind just giving it live. But obviously now that you're in the sort of pandemic, is it easier without fans, or obviously life without fans at sports arena is obviously going to be tough?
Yeah, as far as the press conference and stuff, I mean, that is what it is. Like, I mean, you kind of wait a little bit for people to cheer, boo, or whatever. You're just kind of patient and let them get that out of the way. But as far as the fights, it's really interesting. Like, what I've determined, I mean, after all these months, because obviously we've been watching it for months now, for the lower level fights, like prelim fights, I kind of enjoy the crowd not being there because of what you said, like the random hecklers, the people yelling dumb stuff, put him in a body bag, kick his ass, Seabass, stuff like that. You're like, come on, man, or booing when a fight's, pretty much if it's on the ground, basically they're booing, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't miss that part of it. And then plus, like, being able to really hear the weight of the shots landing. I mean, you can hear the impact that they're making. And then, of course, hearing the coaches giving strategies is great. Hearing guys like Kevin Holland just yapping it up in there is hilarious. So for kind of the lower tier fights, I actually don't mind the crowd not being there. I'm not saying I don't want them back, but for the, when the arenas would have been pretty much empty anyway, I kind of like it completely empty. But when it's a big fight, like when it's a title fight and you don't have that feeling, I keep thinking back to 248. When you think about Zhang Weili and Ioane and Jacek, like what a crazy fight that was, and just the energy and the buzz, and every round it's building, and you're like, and it just feels big. The fight's over and you still don't know who won, and there's all this tension and buzz. Like, not having the crowds for that, like even just the other night, like, heavyweight titles on the line, Stipe and Cormier, and it's just kind of like, so that part of it, for the big fights, man, you do miss the atmosphere. You miss the crowd being there.
Well, when you're at press conferences, when the fans are in the press conference rooms, what's the best atmosphere you've experienced while being at a press conference?
No question about it. New York, man. The crowds up there are crazy, man, because they're heckling, you know what I mean? But that's half the entertainment, you know what I mean? Like they're yelling crazy stuff, and it's usually like pretty clever trash talk, you know what I mean? So it's like funny, like it cracks you up, and you know they're being ruthless and vicious, and some of it's kind of mean or whatever. But yeah, man, New York crowds at those press conferences are hilarious, man. I love the atmosphere and the energy that they bring.
What about an actual UFC event? What's the best atmosphere you've experienced?
Good one. There's been a couple, man. You know, a couple that stand out for me was Rio de Janeiro when the UFC went back to Brazil the first time. You know, you had Anderson, you had Nogueira, you had Shogun, like all on that card, and it was just, man, they hadn't been there in forever, and these guys are you know, these fans are watching their legends. You know what I mean? So that was a really cool one. Anytime GSP fought in Montreal, man, that was especially great. Like in Montreal, the Bell Center, it's the stands are built like a really vertical because it's designed for hockey, and they wanted the fans to be like on top of it as they could. So it's really it's kind of scary, like steep, you know what I mean? But because that, like everybody's right on top of it. So when he would fight, that was amazing. And then you know, Connor in Dublin, especially, man, before he kind of broke out. You know, obviously I don't think he'll be able to fight in 3 Arena anytime again. But man, that small venue is like I think like 9,500 people or so, and on top of that, it's kind of like amphitheater style. So it's just like instead of being all around, it's like really all on like one side, like this wall. And of course, that was the night. I think there were 5 Irish fighters on the card that night that won, and you know, obviously the star and Connor, like just as he was breaking out, that was a really special one. So those would probably be some of the big. I mean, the stadiums are like visually, like all the stadium shows, because I've been at all the stadium shows. Visually, they're awesome. You know what I mean? Because you just look around and you're like, wow. But the sound doesn't travel quite as much because the buildings are so big. So some of those other ones kind of really stand out to me.
From a mental standpoint, how important is it as a journalist to stay alert and to provide fans with up-to-date 24-hour breaking news?
I think it's imperative, man, especially, you know, like you said, this sport never stops. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think it's imperative to do. It's tough sometimes, man. It's tough to walk away from the computer, to walk away from the phone, you know what I mean? To be away. But I think that's how we helped build MMA Junkie. You know, obviously it's been a long ride, but just constant updates to the site, giving people a reason to want to come back and see what's up, see what's the latest, you know, is there a new headline, whatever it is. And so I think it's imperative that you keep people up to date. But it's also imperative for your mental sanity that you hopefully have some other people that you work with that you trust, that you can turn the keys over to and know that they'll be doing the same thing. Because, man, I have a wife and kid, you know, it's like if you're at dinner or you know, with the family and all you're doing is checking your phone for texts or calls or you know, something on Twitter, like that can be like incredibly annoying to them. You know what I mean? So you definitely have to be able to kind of unplug a little bit and pull yourself away from the sport for a little bit.
Who's the best person you've ever interviewed live?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, Connor's been great, right? Like, because the guy is just such a star, man. Chael Sonnen, obviously great, man. Like back in the day, you know, he was the one that kind of started or took it to the next level. I wouldn't say started, but you know, that kind of bringing that pro wrestling parlance into it and having a little fun with it. He's great. Personalities like that make it fun, you know what I mean? But there's so many good people in the sport, like men and women. Honestly, I think it's one of the great things about mixed martial arts. Like, not to insult, you know, athletes in other sports, but for instance, Dan Stupp, the guy that started MMA Junkie, my former editor-in-chief, he worked in baseball for many, many years as well. Man, he used to have nightmares about, like, basically the spoiled brats that they were, you know what I mean, and dealing with them. And, man, just there's so many good people in the sport, and the accessibility that they give us, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's another sport on the planet that the athletes are accessible as they are as mixed martial arts. So it's hard to bring it down to just a few, but you know, those personalities that you never know what's going to come out of their mouth next, man. That's always entertaining.
Who would you say is the GOAT of MMA?
It's John Jones for me, man. It's John Jones. I think the guy's just on another level. I mean, I will say this, like, you know, you got to include Georges St. Pierre in the argument. And I certainly think that he deserves it. I mean, the run that he had, but John Jones to me has just been on a different level for so long. You know what I mean? And you look at the people that he's beat, and yeah, there's been some close ones along the way, but overall, man, he's just dominated a list of people. So, you know, of course, Demetrius Johnson deserves some credit as well, man. That dude on a similar type run. But yeah, for me, I think it's got to be John Jones.
On the topic of John Jones, obviously any MMA fan will realise he's just vacated the light heavyweight title. What's next for him? Is it a clash with Stipe Miocic, even though Dana White has said that Francis Ngannou and Miocic is next?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think it's all going to come down to timing, and I will say this: I love the fact that Dana has said no, and Ngannou's next. He's earned it, because I think he has. You know what I mean? And I think that he should get that fight. So I'm happy for that. But it sounds like John wants to maybe take a little time, kind of bulk up a little bit, put some muscle on his frame, which I think he's going to need to. So yeah, I tend to think John's going to walk into a title fight. I think maybe it'll just be for the winner of that fight, you know, and that'll give him time to kind of get his frame ready and to feel comfortable there. Because I think if you're Jones, and even if you're the UFC, I don't think you risk it with a quote unquote, you know, warm up fight. I mean, there's no warm up fights, there's no easy fights in the UFC, but I don't think you risk it. You know what I mean? I think you put the history on the line, the meaning on the line, and you put him right into a heavyweight title shot. How would you say Jones would fare against either Stipe or Ngannou? That's the beautiful question, right? I mean, clearly, no disrespect to Francis Ngannou, but I think it's clear. I mean, it wouldn't be disrespect to either one. I just said I think he's the greatest of all time. I think John Jones is the more skilled, well-rounded fighter, especially with Ngannou, right? Like, I mean, Ngannou just doesn't have those grappling chops, right? But Ngannou has that thing that, you know, one shot can knock out anybody on the planet, and he doesn't even have to land it clean. You know what I mean? He doesn't even have to be 100% accurate. And so that's scary. You know what I mean? Heck, even when John was talking about going up and, you know, the whole, you know, he wants, you know, this kind of money for it. You know, he said, look, this is a dangerous fight for me, man. I get it. It's dangerous. This is the scariest dude on the planet. So, you know, as long as he can stay away from the power, I like his chances against Ngannou. I think he's a more well-rounded fighter, and I got to imagine his team would put together a game plan to keep him away from that power. Stipe is a little bit more interesting, right? Because I think in the clinch, those wrestling positions, I think John has a tougher time to get him down. So even though Ngannou's the scarier fighter, I think Stipe might prove to be the tougher test for him if you look at the overall well-rounded game. So I'm intrigued by it, man. I really am. And again, it's going to be interesting to see, you know, kind of what John does to pack on muscle. Like, how does his frame look? Because, you know, you certainly don't want to go up there and just get absolutely muscled around. So we'll see. I'm intrigued by it, man. I'm intrigued by it.
You know, out of all the live events you've been to and being cage side for so many big events, A, what's been the biggest or the best fight you've ever witnessed live? And B, what's been the biggest pinch me moment in your career?
Wow, that's crazy, man. Best fight live. Gosh, there's so many that stand out, man. It's so tough, right? But I mean, you got to have Lawler McDonald up there somewhere, right? I mean, just like epic 100%. Brawl. It's got to be up there somewhere. I just think about, you know, guys that push themselves to the limit, man. You know what I mean? The absolute warriors with nothing left, you know, to exhaustion, man. That's it. Jones Gustafsson won. I really enjoyed that fight. You know, it was kind of a classic light heavyweight title fight, seeing John get really pushed to the limit for the first time, but have to dig deep and pull it out late. You know what I mean? And I thought it was interesting afterwards because neither one of them was able to come to the press conference because they both had to go to the hospital. And I actually thought there was something kind of, as weird as it sounds, like something kind of beautiful about that. Like nobody gets to come in and say, you know, make an excuse or say something dumb. You know what I mean? It was just like this amazing title fight, and you're just left with that. You know, you're not left with any quotes or anything like that. Pinch me moments. I mean, listen, it's funny. Like in the moment, you know, you're just there doing your job, right? But then afterwards, like you kind of sit back and you go, like, damn, dude, like that was crazy. Mayweather McGregor would be one of them, just from the sheer what in the hell is going on? Like I cannot believe this is actually happening. That was definitely one of them, and probably like Brock Lesnar's run through the UFC as well. Like it was crazy. I mean, here was this dude that had no business being in the sport basically, and having all this success. And seeing his rise to the top. Ronda Rousey, similarly, you know what I mean? We had gone without women for so long, and then to see her come in and like. I remember, I mean, it's kind of silly, but like being at the first open workout that she did in Southern California, it was at a UFC gym, and being in there and seeing like all these like soccer moms and their daughters and stuff like at an open workout session. Like we'd never seen that, you know what I mean? So now you realize like there's this whole new like, you know, portion of the population that's now going to tune into these fights that never did before. So I guess those would be a couple of them along the way. We're just like, wow, this is crazy. There's been a few rumors over the past couple of years, but do you think we'll ever see Brock Lesnar back in the UFC cage? think the only fight that makes sense for him is Cormier, right? I mean, to me,
Yeah.
I don't think he wants any piece of the UFC heavyweights right now. And Cormier, no disrespect to him, but you don't think of him as a huge power puncher or anything like that. And of course, he's in his 40s as well. So I think that would be the only fight that would make sense. And I know that Cormier said that he's done and he's retired. But if they could make that fight happen, I think DC might come out of retirement for one more. You know what I mean? That was one that he really wanted, being the big wrestling fan that he is as well. Of course, that was a funny moment where they were in the cage together, right? And he pushed him. I mean, that's I think the only fight that Brock would come back with. I don't think he wants any of these up and coming monsters, man. These people are on a different level right now.
But while we're talking about people potentially coming back or not, do you think we'll see Conor back in the cage after his retirement?
Yeah, I do, man. I definitely do. I think it's an interesting time though, right? Talking about this fighting without fans, right? I mean, there's the financial aspect of it, right? I mean, he generates so much money. I mean, he is clearly, unquestionably, the biggest star in the history of the sport, right? And when you talk about the live gates that he generates, that's a lot of money for the promotion and a lot of money, I imagine, for him too. I don't know exactly what his deal entails, but I got to believe, he's such a big star that he could command some of the gate as well. At the very least, the UFC needs it to offset what they have to pay him otherwise. So that's interesting. And plus, just talking about how we were saying, those big moments don't feel quite as big. I think it would be weird, man. Like, right now, I mean, you could Conor Diaz 3 would be an amazing fight. Like, it doesn't matter like who's coming off a win, who's coming off a loss. It doesn't matter, right? Yeah. That's one of those matchups that doesn't matter. But doing it in an empty arena, I don't know, man. It's as weird as that sounds. I mean, it's August. I mean, hell, who knows with this thing, right? But I've got my fingers crossed that we'll have a vaccine in 6 months. Maybe I'm being too aggressive, but I'm hoping, you know what I mean? So maybe, sometime by next summer, and Conor's still in his prime, and obviously he trains and keeps himself in shape. So I do think we'll see him fight again. I honestly think maybe we don't see him until we can actually have crowds again and he can kind of command that live audience. Boy, this is not just thinking, but can you imagine if like the first time that like MMA is back, like he's in the headliner, like we're allowed to have a full arena, and he's the headliner. I mean, how cool would that be to like return to the fight capital of the world? Las Vegas, sold out T-Mobile. Everybody, I don't know, man. And I'm thinking about it, gets me excited. I'd love to see that happen. Like the first time we're able to have a live crowd back, let him be the headliner. How cool would that be?
Obviously, going off of Khabib's words, it looks like 2021 may be the final year we will see Khabib in the octagon. Obviously, he's talked about 2 fights left. When he does decide to hang up the gloves, if he's still the champion, vacates the title, who, in your personal opinion, is the next lightweight champion of the UFC?
Oh, that's great, man. Boy, Poirier, if he's got to be right there, right? But look, let's not look past Justin Gaethje right now, man. You know what I mean? Justin Gaethje. Woo, man, that dude is legit. You know what I mean? I'm so excited for that matchup, man. His wrestling, the way he's mowing through people. But, man, you got to think Poirier's got that drive and has been around for so long that he's got to be right there. I mean, normally before I probably would have said Tony Ferguson, but, not to say that you want to totally write him off. Let's see how he recovers and what he does next. But, man, I don't know if there's a better guy in the sport than Poirier. And obviously the commitment has been there for so long. He's still right up there in the rankings. So, If Khabib makes it through and hangs it up, yeah, I'd go with Dustin Poirier. What
are your predictions for the Khabib Gaethje fight then?
Dude, I'm so torn on that. I cannot wait for that fight, man, because I've been such a fan of Khabib's game, his dominance, his grappling, his pace. You know what I mean? It's so incredible to watch, like what he's able to do to people. Even thinking about like the fight with Poirier, man, that exchange that the microphones caught. Remember when he came back and he's like, he's so strong, I can't get him off me. Like, I mean, you knew that's what you were facing. Like that's all you prepared for, and even then you're like, holy shit, like this dude is the real deal. So I love watching Khabib do that stuff, man. But Gaethje right now is just on another level, man. I mean, he's so powerful and aggressive, and but he's not reckless anymore. You know what I mean? Where it used to be just wild. Like you go back in his World Series days, man. I mean, I loved watching him way back then, in the World Series of fighting. But he was just like chaotic. You were like, dude, you cannot fight like this. Like, thank God you're not fighting the killers in the UFC because you would not stand up to this. And now he is. So, I mean, look, how do you go against the guy that's 28-0, right? Like, he's 28-0 for a reason. You know what I'm saying? But I do believe that this is the toughest test. Like, I know we always said, like, Tony Ferguson, and trust me, I wanted to see that matchup. But a lot of it was, oh, but Tony's dangerous off his back. I mean, sure, you talked about the stand up and the elbows and all those things, but a lot of it was like, and he's so good off his back. And I was always like, yeah, but I don't think you want to be on your back underneath a beat. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. I don't think you want to be there. This one is different because it's like, hey, Gaethje looks like he has the ability to stay upright. He looks like he has the ability to match your pace for 25 minutes, and he has the ability to put your lights out. So I think I'm siding with Mr. 28-0. Yeah. But man, to me, it's a damn coin flip of a fight, which is why it excites me so much.
So here's another close fight. What's your opinions on Adesanya and Costa, the schedule for the next month?
Love that one too, man. How good are these next two pay-per-views, man? I'm so excited, man. Okay, so here's the deal with that. First of all, it looks to me, as far as I can tell, that this is going to be in Abu Dhabi and not in Vegas, which doesn't seem to be a big deal, but of course, it's the two different size cages. And I think that bigger cage, it may not be the difference in the fight, but it certainly doesn't, to me, hurt Adesanya's chances to have some more space to move around in. You know what I mean? That smaller cage would seem to favor just kind of an aggressive bruiser like Bohashinya is. Costa's dangerous too. We're talking about that power again, the power that can change a fight. But I do believe that Adesanya is just so slick and so good. And you look at what he faced in his kickboxing career, you know what I mean? Not that he was undefeated there, but he's seen aggressive, brute strength savages. You know what I mean? He's seen guys move forward. And I just think he's such on another level in terms of his distance, his timing, his understanding of space, his footwork. All those things, man. So I think I got to go with Adesanya here. Again, I'm a big Costa fan, man. I've loved watching his rise. I love his personality that he has too. He's barely speaking English, but he makes sure he's got some trash talk ready to go. You know what I mean? I love it. So I love his whole demeanor and his attitude. And he may be champion one day as well. I mean, obviously he's a young guy, so he may be champion as well. But I think I like Adesanya, man. He's got to stay. Obviously, you can't get touched. You know what I mean? You don't want them skinny ribs to get all touched up, right? But I think he's polished enough on the feet that he can stay away from it.
Obviously, you've covered the combat sports MMA game for just over 14 years plus. Do you think the UFC can ever surpass boxing, or has it surpassed boxing right now, in your opinion?
It's interesting because to me, it depends on who you're talking about as a market. You know what I mean? On a global market, I'd still say boxing is probably bigger, you know what I mean? But I do think that, I do think it will just in time, because I feel like, that's kind of the new combat sport, you know what I mean? Like it's what the younger generation is watching versus boxing. So I think there's a lot of kind of older boxing fans that have been watching it for a long time that at some point they're going to get old and die, you know what I mean? And the UFC, it'll be this kind of younger generation. I mean, you got kids now. I was talking about with my dad one time. I can't think of exactly when it happened. But I remember at some point along the path when if you ask somebody, are you watching the fight this weekend, it used to mean boxing. Now it means MMA. You know what I mean? So it's just so much more accepted now. So I do believe that. Now, again, the people that want to say boxing's dead or whatever, idiots. You know what I mean? No, like look at these huge. I mean, when there are massive boxing events, like they are massive and they feel massive and they appeal to this global audience. But yeah, I do. I mean, I do believe that one day the mixed martial arts and UFC, obviously, especially as the leading brand, will be bigger than boxing.
What's your favorite thing about covering MMA?
The people, definitely the people, the athletes, man. I love it, man. That's the thing that I think really. I mean, I love the sport itself. Like to me, it is, it's kind of like people talk about it's like human chess. You know what I mean? It is cool, right? Like especially when you really start to when you really start to learn the grappling game, you really start to get into it, and you realize like all the intricacies of the grappling exchanges. I mean, I think we all know what striking looks like and what good striking looks like. But when you're first starting your journey into mixed martial arts and you start learning the grappling, I think that's fun. So I love the sport itself. But it's the people, man. It's the sacrifices. Like I love seeing that, man. Like and covering it and helping to tell their story. Of these people who, just have to make ultimate sacrifices. I mean, it is a complete lifestyle, and you have to give up on a lot of things. And man, what they go in there and do, it's amazing, man. Obviously it's been a little while since I've trained. I do a lot more drinking and frosty beverages these days than time in the gym. But even when I used to train, when I was younger and I used to train, like I loved the sport, but like there was never a part of me that was like, yeah, man, I really love this. And now I need to get in the ring and test myself, or now I need to get in a cage and test myself. I'm like, nah, I'm good, man. Like just training is good enough for me. So to know, the kind of the psychological courage that these athletes have to do to do what they do, it's pretty amazing.
With regards to covering the sport for a while, you've seen so many athletes come and gone. What would you say is the best underdog story in the history of the UFC?
Best underdog story. That's a good question. I mean, obviously Connor's rise is insane. I love the idea that he almost missed the flight to his first UFC fight because he wanted to go pick up that 188-pound welfare check, and his team was like, no. So seeing that guy right, but people knew he was going to be a star. I'll tell you one thing that's been fun. I don't know if you'd call it an underdog story, but man, the recent rise of Jorge Masvidal has been fun to watch. Right? I mean, a guy that's been around doing it forever and ever and ever. And yeah, the hardcores knew who he was, and of course, he had the respect from the street fights back in the day, and all that he'd been through. But to see him become one of the biggest stars in the sport, man, that's been a fun story to cover, to see his rise to absolute superstardom. I guess that'd be a couple that stand out to me. I mean, as far as, and if you're talking about like single nights, like obviously Matt Serra's victory over George St. Pierre was just ridiculous, dude. I mean, not giving that guy a chance in hell, man. I remember that. I'll tell you another guy this is funny. So the Ultimate Fighter, we used to do interviews with all of them, like as they were starting filming. Like we would go and we would interview like all 16 or 14 cast members, or whatever it was, depending on that year. And then we would hold the stories until taping was done, it was released, and then we would write stories about all of them. And I remember the season that Kelvin Gastelum was on, and meeting him and immediately going like, this dude is going to be the first one out of the house, dude. Like, he's so young and pudgy, and I was like, this dude does not stand a chance. And look at what he ended up doing and is continuing to do these days. So pretty wild. That was a funny one.
Well, a good story is the title winning for Michael Bisping a couple of years back. Well, both me and James are obviously both English. If England are to have another UFC champion, who do you think it'll be?
I mean, for a while it looked like it was going to be Till, right? I mean, and now you wonder. I mean, I still think he could potentially be there. I mean, I think he's got to be, the leading candidate right now. I feel bad for my man Leon. They got to get him a fight, dude. I mean, he's sitting there right there at the top of the rankings, and he's on quite the run. They need to get him a fight. I think those would probably be your two leading candidates right now. And man, you know what? I'll tell you what. Like the Bisping Rockhold, obviously amazing, kind of an underdog story there, fun fight, but. One of my favorite fights of all time, and I probably should have thought about this one at the time when you asked about favorite fights to cover live, was that Anderson Silva fight, man. That to me, I've always said it. That fight to me played out like a movie, man. You know what I mean? Like it is, first round, like, Bisping just put that one in the bank. Second round, I think he won that round too. Like, oh my God, what's happening here? And then, the dude gets knocked out at the end of the third round. You're like, oh, there it is. No, wait, they're not calling it. He's back. And then Anderson, I'm like, well, that's not going to matter because Anderson's just going to go crush him right here at the start of this one. And then he lets him off the hook. And just the ups and downs of that. And, I remember that fight week, like everybody you talked to, like, of course, everybody in England, because obviously the fight was in London. Of course, everybody was like, yeah, we're pulling for our man, but it's Anderson Silva, you know what I mean? I think everybody felt the same way. Like, I mean, we want him to win, but like we know it's Anderson Silva. And that fight to me is still one of my favorite fights of all time.
If you could pick a fight that's been underwhelming, which would you say is the most underwhelming fight that you've seen?
It's got to be Louis Ngannou, right? I mean, that's got to be literally. That's got to be literally the fight that everybody was like, "There's no way this fight's gonna suck." Like that's the one that you're like, dude. Call your friends that have never watched MMA before and tell them to turn this on because something crazy is about to happen. And then you just watch and you're like, oh, jeez. So that'd probably be it, man. As much as I like both those guys, and I think I think they'll probably meet again, and I don't think that fight will look anything like it did that first time, to be honest with you. So I'm not opposed to them running it back. But yeah, that first one was just like, oh, dude, what are we watching here?
Obviously nowadays, from a sort of social media dominated platform, you look across Twitter and you see all sorts of fans again. This guy's going to be the next big thing. This guy's going to be the next big thing. But from your personal opinion, who is the next big star in the UFC?
That's a good question, man. I got to see somebody. I mean, to me, it was Adesanya for a while, man. You could just see it right away. Like,
100%.
And I don't know that, and I don't think he's reached his top level yet. You know what I mean? I think he's still rising. I mean, that's not a tough pick to make though, because I think he's there, but I think he's going to continue getting bigger. It's tough right now because, you got to have a mix of everything, right? Like to me, you definitely have to be a great fighter. I mean, you can't be just entertaining on the microphone and not win fights, right? I mean, no matter, you can only get hyped up to see a guy lose so many times, right? So you got to be a great fighter. But this is a day, man, like where you have to be an entertainer as well. I mean, you just absolutely have to, at least to some degree. And I know that kind of sucks. I feel like we've watched that transition where, like, I think everybody accepts it now. Like, I think there was a time when there were athletes who were like, well, that's just not me. That's not the kind of person I am. And I'm just going to win fights and that'll be enough. And I think everybody realizes, like, no, it's not going to be enough for you, man. It's not going to be enough anymore. So, I think Adesanya still has a rise as superstar. I'm trying to think if anybody's like kind of under the radar right now that I'm thinking about. I'm sure there's somebody. Well, I mean, Hamzat Chimaev, we mentioned his name earlier, but that dude, man, like, I think he's going to be something because I think he's got ridiculous skills. I don't know how much of his tape that you've seen, but he can strike too. I mean, it's not, he's not Adesanya-esque in his striking, but he's actually got some hands too. But I like his attitude, man. He's kind of got that sly again. He doesn't speak fully English. He doesn't have full command of the English language, but what he does is pretty funny. He's got that kind of wry Habib-esque, line him up and I'll smash him and that sort of thing. That guy looks like somebody I definitely want to watch because I think he is talented. He appeals to a broad audience, right? I mean, he's got the Russian background. He lives and trains in Sweden. He's got kind of a global potential, and I think he's going to be something special. So that'd probably one guy that I'm definitely excited to see fight again.
Obviously, Petr Yan becoming the recent bantamweight champion, obviously from Russia as well. Who would you say is going to be the next European champion?
That's a good question, man. Petr Yan is awesome, man. It was great to see his rise. That guy, you could see it right away with him, right? You get like, this dude has definitely got it. He's got some tough fights ahead. I'm super excited to see him and Aljamain Sterling. Next European champion right now. Anybody stands out for me right now. I don't know who you guys got. Let me hear your thoughts. Let me think about the rankings here for a second. Who you guys got?
Oh. Go on, Mason. You first, mate. I've got to think about this one on the top of my head.
You just line him up for me.
Put me on the spot there.
I genuinely don't know. It's a tough one.
And I can't think of it. I feel like I'm being disrespectful of the European talent pool. I mean, I guess the easy one would be able to say Jan Blachowicz, right? Because he's got it coming up right now. But that's a tough one, man. I think Dominic Reyes, and he could be Dominic Reyes. So I guess that would be maybe the easiest answer to go with. But I was trying to think of somebody maybe that's like a little further away. You know what I mean? Somebody that's a little further down. But I guess the easy answer would be Jan Blachowicz, but he's got a hell of a test with Dominic Reyes coming up.
Yeah, I was going to say, you speak to a couple of people across UK and Britain. They all talk about Nathaniel Wood and the prospects they call him. Obviously, he suffered a setback against Dodson and recently got back in the column. But people have hyped him up and, they called him the next big thing. So if there's an outsider there from a European UK perspective, he's within a shout if he gets back on the saddle in his next fight. You never know. But, yeah, it's certainly a tough one.
I agree. I like that kid's got something, man. There's that. He's definitely got some skill. I'm excited to see him fight again, too. He's got some real talent.
Obviously, you just touched upon Jan Blachowicz, Dominic Reyes. What have you got for that one?
I think I like Dominic Reyes here. I mean, Jan Blachowicz, though, has looked. I think he's perennially kind of underrated. You know what I mean? He's. And I don't know why that is. Part of it, I guess, is because he's not the most dynamic fighter in terms of like speed and that sort of thing. I mean, but he does have the legendary Polish power. Let's not overlook that. And I think he's a better fighter than he's given credit for. But I do like Dominic Reyes right now. Man, he looks so good against John Jones. He really did. I did score that fight for John Jones. But the way he looked in those opening 2 rounds, man, especially, like, I thought he looked phenomenal. So I like Dominic Reyes in that one. I feel bad for him, you know what I mean? Because I think that people, even if he become, and it would be Blachowicz too. I mean, there's going to be an asterisk next to that, right? I mean, because it's going to be like, hey, that's kind of John Jones's belt, you know what I mean? I feel like it's going to take a while, like a couple of defenses, before people really give him any legitimate type consideration as a real champion. And I think that sucked. I mean, it's not their fault. It's not their fault that the guy went out of the division. But there's no question they're going to have to answer questions about it. The people are going to be like, talking about the legitimacy or the validity of them as champion. But But, start racking up wins and then, and Dominic Reyes has got the right attitude, right? Like, I love that what he said the other day. He's like, I scared him out. Like, no, you didn't. But that's the right thing to say. That's absolutely the right thing to say. And, of course, if he rattles off, 5-6 defenses in a row or whatever, then all of a sudden he can say, hey, he can go back to that and be like, well, that's just John Jones' belt. Be like, well, it's not my fault John Jones left. I had him. A lot of people thought I beat him. Then he left. Like, if he wants to come back, it's right here around the waist. Yeah, come get me. So we'll see how all that plays out. But it's going to be tough for them to get, I think, respect for a little bit as a champion, unfortunately.
Well, while we've talked about people potentially being the next big thing, what do you think's next for Sean O'Malley after his recent loss?
I tell you what, man. I don't like a lot of things he's saying right now. You know what I mean?
No, 100%.
I really don't. And I like Sean O'Malley. I'm not trying to say I disrespect the guy. And there is something. And I always say this too. I always say that be careful. I hear people say, I don't like so and so because so and so's cocky. I'm like, listen, understand kind of what we talked about earlier. Like, the type of confidence you must have in yourself to step into a cage with another human being who is hell-bent on doing physical damage to you has to be enormous. You need to believe in yourself. Your self-belief needs to be at such a high level that it borders on insanity. You know what I mean? So I don't worry about that. You know what I mean? Like, if I think a guy's too confident that they're almost cocky, I don't worry about that. You need to be there. But some of the quotes he was giving in that his podcast afterwards, where it's just basically giving, no credit at all to Marlon Vera. I don't like that. You know what I mean? What I like to hear is somebody kind of assessing what went wrong and open, honest evaluation about it, and knowing I'm going to go back to the drawing board and I'm going to correct that. And these are the changes that I'm going to implement. I mean, that's what you see, like, growth in athletes, right? I mean, it's a cliche now, right? But the win or learn, like, that's what you want, right? Win or learn and get better. I mean, did Sean really learn anything by that? You know what I mean? And I get it. It's a weird kind of way for a fight to end and that sort of thing. But I think the kid's a star, man. The dude has incredible kind of that X factor, like we were talking. He's got a wide appeal, right, to a lot of different people, and he's cool, and he's a gamer, and he's got the weed culture and all these things. He's got a lot of things going for him, right? But man, I'm interested to see how he bounces back and what changes. You hope that he doesn't just blow that off and be like, no big deal, and just go back to doing exactly what you're doing, because I think it'll cost him again down the line. But that said, that kid's got plenty of good days ahead of him, man. You know what I mean? He's a talented fighter. That you can see the skill. His striking is incredible. His grappling is fantastic, and like I said, he's a marketable commodity as well. So that guy's got plenty of good days ahead of him. I'm not trying to downplay, what his potential is, but yeah, I'm really interested to see what the mindset is moving forward.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think with fighters like that who just came in with an undefeated record, they lose that that status. And sometimes it takes a defeat for them to say and wake up and smell the coffee and realize what went wrong for them. And you look at Edmund Shabazian as well. He lost his undefeated record recently, and sometimes it takes defeat for them to step back and get back to the drawing board and go, I might change this approach, and then they could look 10 times better in their next fight, and then go from there. And like you said, I think Sean's a real star, and I don't like what he's saying recently, but hopefully his mentality is there in terms of wanting to succeed and get back out there as soon as possible.
Yeah,
but
I completely agree with that.
But obviously, just moving on swiftly, you look at championship fights, and we've had various controversies over the years. From your sort of standpoint, and say if you were judging a fight, what would score better in your opinion? Say if you took the first 2-3, maybe 2 maybe 3 rounds as opposed to the latter rounds, what scores better in your scorecards, in my opinion? Because you look at the Dominic Reyes John Jones fight. John Jones dominated the last couple rounds. Arguably Dominic Reyes took the first few. So what scores better in your opinion?
Yeah, or think it's another one, man, that was like, I scored it for Alexander Volkanovski, but the recent fight with Max Holloway, right? Like, how crazy was that one, right? Because the first 2 rounds, Max looked phenomenal. I mean, I'm like, this dude's on another planet right now. Like, this is amazing. And then the last 3 rounds, I scored all 3 of those rounds for Alexander Volkanovski. But I mean, I'm talking about by this, you know what I mean? And so it's weird. Or like going way back in the day, like GSP and Johnny Hendricks was another one like that, where you're like, the guy that won 2 rounds clearly versus the guy that won 3 rounds. They kind of eked him out a little bit or whatever. So, listen, to me, I think it's important to remember, man, those 5 minutes, you've got to score them independently, man. And as difficult as it is, because I've heard a lot of options for scoring changes over the years, what have you, and I have yet to hear one that I think is really good. You know what I mean? Like people, you should judge the fight in its entirety. You know, I get it, but like that's really hard. I mean, at the end of the fifth round, to weigh that evenly with what happened at the end of the first or the beginning of the first, and to have it all weigh equally in your head, man, we do have recency bias, like what we've just seen. You know what I mean? So it's difficult. So for me, I think the most important key is it shouldn't matter what part of the fight is taking place, man. You've got to score every one of those individually, and I'm definitely not saying that the scoring system is perfect. I like one that I hear a lot is like the half point system. I'm not a big fan of that, because I don't feel like the problem is the points that, like, so we're just picking the wrong person. You know what I mean? Now like we can't even pick the right person, but we want them to now add in half points too. Like that one's weird to me. But I do feel like it's getting better, man. I do feel like the people that are judging these days are committed. You hear about like these calls that they have, like they're kind of banding together as like a group and, watching old fights and discussing them and scoring them together on, virtual calls just like this, so I think it's getting better. But to go back to your original question, I think what's important to remember is, man, you got to score everything independently. And, man, even as a judge, like you can't even think like, well, that was close, but I gave the first two to him, so I'll just lean this way this time. Like, no. You can't factor that in. You got to score everything independently.
And with some of those fights in the controversial decisions, championship fights, do you ever go back to them the next day, watch these fights, and sort of go, hang on a minute, I might have scored this wrong. I might have given this to the other fighter. Have you ever caught yourself doing that?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So a couple things about that. First of all, I always admit, because normally when I am scoring fights, I'm doing one of two roles basically when I'm on site. If I'm the only one there, if there's only one of us, then I'll be in the back and I'll be working a video camera, because we'll be interviewing all the winners, right? And obviously we want to collect that video footage for MMA Junkie. If there's two of us, then more than likely I'll have like my videographer Ken Hathaway in the back, and I'll be doing play-by-play. I'll be cage shot doing play-by-play. And when I'm doing play-by-play, I'm typing up everything. It's updating MMA Junkie with round by round, so people can refresh it on their phones and get updates and that sort of thing. And I'm scoring it. And I always admit, like, that is not the ideal way to score a fight. You know what I mean? It's like trying to type everything while you do it and make sure you're not making any typos. You're looking down every now and then to make sure your hands are right. And I'm not even though I've been doing it for this long, I'm not the best typer in the world either. So I'm not, if I was one of those savant keyboard wizards, man, I'd probably be better at it. So I always admit that, you know what I mean? Like it's not the ideal way to score a fight. But yeah, I go back and watch them a lot, man. The other thing too is, I don't ever trust the scores of anybody that puts money on fights. So I don't bet on fights. I cannot divorce myself of my money in my mind and just be like, I'm looking at this independently. Like I've placed a couple wagers like way back in the day when I first moved to Vegas, especially because I was like, it's super easy there. Yeah. And then I realized, like, as the fight's happening, like, I'm looking for reasons my guy is winning rather than just independently looking at the fight. So if somebody has money on it, I never trust their judgment. But yeah, absolutely, man. I love going back and watching those fights again and reassessing them. I mean, it's tougher now that there's fights every week, and then now with Contender Series, there's a Tuesday night and a Saturday night, so you don't have as much like off time as you used to really go back and visit them. But yeah, especially with like controversy or closely scored fights or whatever, I'll definitely go back and watch them and kind of evaluate myself. Like, what did I see? Was I wrong here? I think that's just a smart thing to do,
Well, I know recently there's been another fight announced. There's been quite a few fights being announced. Brian Ortega and the Korean Zombie's been re-announced for, I think, October. How do you see that one playing out?
That's another one I'm excited for, right? I mean, Zombie, dude, like he's looked like an absolute killer, right? And Ortega, how's he gonna bounce back, man? You know what I mean? That's a great one, right? To see where he's at. It seems like now with Ortega, it seems like a guy that stepped back and assessed everything, right? And said, man, I got to make changes. I got to make wholesale changes and everything. And so I'm anxious to see kind of what he's added to his game. But it's been so damn long too. Is there going to be some rust there? It's going to be tough for him to get that timing going, that sort of thing. So I'd have to say, as much as difficult as I'd probably lean towards the hot hand with Zombie, just slightly. But I've always been a big Ortega fan, man. His jiu-jitsu is dangerous. If he can lean on that a little bit more than perhaps he had been for a little bit. I mean, we'll see how it happens if emotion gets the best of them. Right, at first it's just like kind of a respectful battle between two martial artists, and now it's like a grudge match, right? So we'll see if emotion plays a part of that at all. So that's another one, man. I'm absolutely fired up for. Probably lean a little bit towards Zombie, but I've always been a big fan of Ortega too, so I'm anxious to see what he can do.
While you touched up on Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway earlier on, what do you think's next for Max?
Tough, right? Because as long as Volkanovski's there, like I just don't see him getting another title shot. You know what I mean? So you wonder if maybe now is the time to go to lightweight, but for more of an extended run. You know what I mean? To like actually, not have to put yourself through those weight cuts and maybe put a little muscle on. I mean, I know he kind of dallied there for a little bit, but it was just more of a test, right? You know what I mean? It wasn't necessarily committed to the long term. So honestly, man, I think a lightweight move wouldn't be the worst thing ever, man. You get like a fresh list of opponents that you haven't fought before. It makes it exciting, and you don't have to put yourself through that weight cut anymore. So I'll be interested to see what he does, but I wouldn't mind seeing him move up in division, because as long as Volkanovski is going to be around, I just don't see him putting that third fight together. So what are you fighting for at that point?
Besides all the upcoming title fights, which obviously non-title fight battle are you most looking forward to in the upcoming months?
Boy, that you hit on it with the Zombie and Ortega fight is probably the one that I'm most looking forward to right now. That's a big one. What else is out there that I might be looking for? What about Anderson Silva, Uriah Hall? Can I say that one, man? As crazy as that is, like seeing Anderson Silva maybe kind of finally put it up. I like against Uriah Hall. I mean, it's kind of a weird matchup, but I'm looking forward to that one. You know what? What else? I am excited. We mentioned Till earlier. I am excited for Till and Hermanson. Like, I think I'm a big fan of those guys. And I'd say probably Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis as well, as weird as that is, because I think that might not necessarily be the best fight. Obviously, Curtis Blades wrestling is going to be tough for Derek to deal with, but I like the spice that Derek added to it, where he was like, I'm going to take him down and finish him. There's your headline. Use that as the headline. And then Blades came out and was like, challenge accepted. I mean, I loved that. So I think the build up to that one could be pretty fun.
As an organization, A, how much has the UFC changed since 1993? And B, how much has the UFC changed as an organization across Great Britain and Europe? Yeah,
no, since 1993, it's amazing. Like kind of we touched on earlier, man, in the early days of sport. I mean, the first UFC I ever went to was UFC 16 back in 1999, I believe. And back then it wasn't even, it wasn't even a thought. I mean, it was just a Wild West spectacle. You know what I mean? Now it's an absolute powerhouse industry, and it's in some ways it's changed for not necessarily the most romantic ways. Like, it used to be kind of a family business, that was kind of us against the world. Now it's a big corporation, I mean, that really, I mean, you could make the argument it's not even so much of a media company as is, or not so much a fight company as a global media company, right? I mean, it's about creating content that then you can license out and sell places. The content happens to be based around fights, but it's really about that, so there's things about it that you might not love as much, but what they've done to bring, mixed martial arts to the forefront, and what they've done to make it accepted. I mean, when was the last time you had to argue with somebody about like whether or not this even is a real sport, or whether, you know what I mean? Like, that's what we used to have to do. Like back in the day, it was like, should this even be legal? And I haven't heard that conversation in a long, long time. People get it and accept it and understood. It's well regulated. And yeah, there's going to be people that don't necessarily love it. I think it's always going to be a little bit of a niche sport, right? Like, there's people that just don't like seeing people get punched in the face, and that's never going to change. But they've done such a good job of bringing it to acceptance. And as you said, man, bringing it all over the world, man. And that part of it is really cool. And now we're really starting to see the talent emerge from all over the world, which is even cooler. It's one thing to be like, hey, we got TV deals there everywhere. Okay, awesome. But now to be like, hey, and we got athletes coming out of these countries, I mean, that makes it exciting, to know that the pool of talent and resources that's available is so much larger. So, man, yeah, the organization has changed dramatically, and you whether or not you like the UFC, and I get it, man, there's some people that just want to bash the UFC, right, like, every chance they get. And I understand they don't do everything perfect. But, man, you cannot take away, like, what their contributions to the growth of the sport have been, man. They, by far and away, have done more than anybody else in the industry to get the sport recognized and to help it grow.
What would be your advice to those wants to succeed in the media industry?
Interesting. I get a lot of people that say that they want to do this for a living, and what should they do? And I say, man, first of all, chase your dreams, because it's awesome. Like, I feel like I have a dream job, and no matter how much I work, like, it doesn't matter. Like, 16-hour day, whatever, man. I love it. Like, I would do nothing different, But do realize it's not a job you're going to get wealthy doing. You know what I mean? Like you're never going to get rich doing this. And there's not a lot of full-time jobs available even out there in the media. So you got to be aware of that. You know, can you create something for yourself rather than trying to go to work for somebody else? Because there's just, there's not a whole lot of spots out there. So maybe it's a situation where doing something on your own ends up being the better thing. But what I always tell people is this, like, just first of all, work your ass off. You know what I mean? Like that's the one thing you can control is your work ethic, man. If you work hard, I do believe that there are rewards available. Practice, you know what I mean? If you don't have a job already or you're working on it, man, just even if I say, like, even if you launch a blog or something that nobody ever reads that you just do for yourself, like whatever it is, if you want to write, just write a lot. If you want to podcast a lot. If you want to do whatever it is you want to do, just do it. Even if it's not getting consumed by anybody and you're just doing it for yourself, do it, because the more repetitions you get, the more comfortable you're going to get and the better you're going to get at it over time. And I always say to people too is start out by covering your local scene. You know what I mean? Like if you want to get reps in, cover your local scene. I mean, it's hard to say like, oh, I'm going to start a blog and I'm going to cover the UFC. I mean, you're going to compete with Junkie and Fighting and Sherdog and that's hard, man. We got staffs and budgets and corporations behind us. But start out with your local scene, because first of all, your local scene is dying for coverage. I mean, the athletes, the organizations would appreciate any kind of presence out there. 2, that's going to get you practice, and 3, you're going to develop relationships, right? Like you're going to develop relationships with fighters that maybe one day are in the UFC, and now you're the one that's breaking all their news and getting the best exclusive interviews. Same thing with managers and promoters and all that stuff. They're going to get to know you, and you're going to build those relationships, and that can be good for your Rolodex down the line. And lastly, I just say, man, conduct yourself professionally. You know what I mean? This is a small world, and be careful what you say and do. Don't be that guy that's just saying something like crazy for clicks or whatever. I always say, like, criticize all you want, evaluate all you want, but don't ever say or publish anything that you wouldn't say to somebody's face. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like if it's a valid argument, and you just, hey, here's what I thought about your last performance, and here's where I felt you could have improved, and here's where it looked like to me like you were lacking. Okay, that's fine. But, like, that guy sucks, or that guy has no business doing that. Like, hey, would you say that to that person's face? Because they probably are going to see it at some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As much as people like to say, oh, I don't read any of that stuff. Nah, they read it. They read it. They see it. So I guess that'd be some of my advice in a nutshell.
Literally just scrolling through Twitter right now. I've got a couple of quick fire questions. If that's all right for you, mate. Sure. I appreciate your time. If you were a matchmaker right now, what fights would you make? And then he's quoted, obviously, other than Khabib Tony, and why?
The one fight that I really want to see that I don't know if it'll come together or not is if Khabib does get by Gaethje. And obviously that's an if, man. As we talked about, it's a stiff test. I would love to see GSP come back for that, man. Khabib and GSP, like the greatness. And I know he said the other day that he doesn't like the idea of 155. So that would kind of ruin it a little bit for me, because I'd love to see it at 155, because on the one hand, you'd have, Khabib going for this 30-0 record and then walk off, into the sunset. On the other hand, you'd be going for GSP looking for his third title, become the first person to hold a title in 3 divisions. I mean, there would be so much history on the line. And then, of course, just a battle of 2 all-time greats. I would love to see that fight. I don't know if it's a fantasy fight or not. I mean, GSP came back once out of the blue. Maybe he'd do it again. I'd love to see that. And we mentioned it too, but just as a goofy one, man, Lesnar Cormier, man. I think it would be fun. It'd be ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like, what is Brock Lesnar doing back? But I mean, I was seeing the smile on Cormier's face when Lesnar was in the cage and pushing him, and it would be fun, and it would be fun to see. I mean, I think everybody in the sport loves Cormier, man. He's such a likable guy. I know he was the kind of a not well liked for a long time, but I think people have seen now that he's a good dude. And to see one more build up for a fight against a character like Lesnar, who really is a character, I think would be great. Because even if DC had won and people are like, oh, he should fight John Jones again, I'm like, dude, you don't want your final fight to be against John Jones, because John Jones, if he beats you, is not going to pick you up off the canvas and raise your hand in the air and be like, oh, you're a champion, blah. No, he's going to rub it in your face for the rest of your life. So, yeah, anyway, long story short, I think those would be the 2 fights I'd want to see, even though one of them's kind of crazy. Well, they're both maybe crazy. But I'm matchmaker, so I can do what I want.
How do you feel about the evolution of the media within MMA, and how have MMA Junkie managed to stay as one of the top media outlets as you have all of these rising media companies?
I appreciate that. No, the evolution's been great, man. To see like how far it's come in terms of professionalism and who's involved in it and overall, first of all, just overall mainstream acceptance has been great. I mean, to think that a company like USA Today would be interested in purchasing us back in 2011, I mean, that's cool. You know what I mean? Now it's sort of so the evolution of it's been great. I think that there's, continues to be higher levels of professionalism all the time. I mean, I guess right now is kind of tough because everybody's kind of dealing with this pandemic and that sort of thing. So I feel like everybody's doing what we're doing right now. You know what I mean? So I'm seeing a whole lot of this stuff. You know what I mean? But that's just the reality of the way it is right now. So I think it's probably been stagnant for the last 6 months or so. But overall, man, I think the progression has been great. And it's great to see more people get involved and more outlets get involved and more positions available. I mean, it sucks too. Think about like how cool it was that The Athletic got involved, even though they hired away 2 of our writers and our former editor went to be there. Was still happy for all of them, and and even by them hiring away people from our staff, we got to bring new people in, and people that didn't have full-time jobs before. So it was great. And then the damn pandemic hit and they had to lay off most of their staff. You know what I mean? So this last 6 months has sucked. But overall, man, I think the levels of professionalism are so much higher. And I think it's great to see how much more coverage there is. And in terms of Junkie, first of all, man, I think, again, hard work, man. I think we've worked hard. We've always worked hard. We have some grinders on the staff, man. Matt Erickson's been around forever. Mike Bond's been around for several years now. New pickups with Nolan King, Farah Hanoun, Danny Segura, Dave Doyle. I mean, everybody's been cracking. Our video team is awesome. So I mean, just the whole team, man. I think they work hard. I think that's a big part of it. And again, kind of adhering to those core values, man. Be true to yourself and true to the sport. You know what I mean? Don't go out there doing something that's cheap. I think there's a lot of times where it would be really easy to do something cheap on a day, to get really good views that day. But then you start, ruining your reputation in the long term. And I think, making sure that we have a decent reputation, that we're not tarnishing, I think is important.
Another one wants to know who is the best referee currently in the UFC.
That's a good. What's funny is a couple of local referees here in Las Vegas, Chris Tione and Mark Smith. I've seen them from when they started, like in the amateur ranks. You know what I mean? Because I've commentated amateur events out here for years, and now they're getting to ref fights every Tuesday and Saturday, and so like their level is getting so high, man. Because they're getting the reps over and over and over, which I think is awesome. So seeing the growth of people like that is great. It's tough right now because man, you got to look at like Mark Goddard is one of the best in the business right now, right? But he's having to go in patches a little bit. Now, luckily, like he works for a lot of global organizations, so it seems like he's been, trying to stay busy, which is good because it's just tough right now with the way the world is. And man, Ben Cartledge, a great judge who's talks to media and is great about being out there. He mentioned when the Fight Island run started, it had been like, I want to say like 2 months or 3 months or something to see a judge to fight. And so he's kind of like, not nervous, but you're like, damn, you got to get into that routine again. You got to get in that flow. So globally, man, I think you got to think Mark Goddard is definitely one of the best. Herzog is a very, very professional referee as well, man. I think he does a fantastic job. And like I said, I think you're seeing a lot of growth with these Vegas referees because they're getting reps week in and week out. And I think like Tione has had some really tough assignments over the last couple weeks, like fights where you're like, should I stop it? Should I not stop it? Should I stop it? And he's been like right on top of it. So I think you're going to see these kind of local guys get really, really good because I mean, I think, look, we know we're going back over to Fight Island, but man, I think we'll probably finish the year out in Vegas, right? I mean, I don't think we're going anywhere from the Apex anytime soon.
Another one wants to ask how you got into MMA media. Obviously, you touched upon your early days, and if one was trying to grow to the level of MMA Junkie ranks, how would you tell them to achieve such a goal?
Yeah, it's hard, man. You know what I mean? But that you kind of going back to those basic principles, and like I said, like starting something on your own, just so you're getting practice and you're building clips. You know what I mean? Like you're building a profile, so that way, when maybe some of the major sites, do have openings or whatever, that you have basically a portfolio, a resume that you have built up that you can show them like, hey, here's what I've been doing. Here's my clips. You can see what I've done, and I mean, just having current stuff. And I would say too, the other thing too, besides covering local, just try to just cover it from a unique angle. Like if you're going to cover, if you're going to cover the sport on an international stage or whatever, like just try to come up with something unique. Try to come up with like a unique way of doing it rather than just here's my recap of UFC 253 or whatever, like how are you ever going to get to, how's that ever going to get coverage? You know what I mean? How's that ever going to get seen? So, like I said, talk about follow those practices that we talked about earlier and just do it, man. Chase after it. Like I said, it's not the most financially rewarding career ever. I mean, fortunately, like, you know, it's not, my family's doing okay. We're perfectly middle class. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when you love something and you're working in a passion, man, it's a cliche, but it really is. It's very rewarding.
And just one final one from the fan. What's the biggest moment in MMA that changed the sport?
Ooh, that's a good question. Biggest moment that changed the sport. I mean, look, it's a cop-out answer to some degree, but you got to say Griffin Bonner, right? I mean, the Ultimate Fighter finale. Man, you know, that was a moment in time where the sport was almost done. You know what I mean? And to have that fight, you know, at that time, man, I think that changed a lot. And you know, the other not as fun, but you know, getting on Fox, that was a big damn deal. You know what I mean? Getting on network television, and not only just getting on network television because of the audience, but then it started allowing like sponsors and major companies and that sort of thing to look at it as like, oh, okay, this stuff's okay. You know, it's all right to be associated with this stuff. So those are two big kind of pivotal moments, I would say.
Yeah, and just one final one for me. Obviously, it's not a question. I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on. I know you're a busy man right now. You're literally doing work non-stop 24/7, so I appreciate your time. I don't know if you've got anything more to say, Mason.
No, I was going to say that I've asked everything I wanted to, and I just wanted to say thanks so much for coming on, John. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. I'm glad you guys had me. You picked the perfect week, man. I'm on furlough, so it's the one time I'm not doing the non-stop work. I'm not doing shit, so it was good to come on. I appreciate it, guys.
Enjoy your time with your family, mate.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks so
Take
much.
care, mate. All the best.